Hello, everybody. I am Sheila Ronning, CEO and founder of Women in the Boardroom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Women in the Boardroom is a membership organization committed to advancing women in their careers and into the boardroom. And our focus is on senior executive level women who are working to become better leaders, be connected with corporate board openings, and to receive guidance as they go and prepare for board service. For more information on our membership program, you can visit us at womenintheboardroom.com. And we also have a video there that will give you a great overview of how our program works, along with the video also contains a frequently asked questions section as well. So hopefully it will answer all of your questions on what we do. Now on to today's program. Our subject matter is From Average to Iconic: the 3 secrets to being a great speaker. I know we all want to be that. So thank you so much for joining us today. Our speakers are Alejandra Crisafulli and Bonnie, and I'm so sorry, Bonnie, I didn't ask you how to say your last name, but Bonnie Bonadeo, hopefully. They each have their own companies and together have co-founded Naked Audience Productions. Alejandra is a master coach and has a master's of metaphysical sciences and a proven track record for enhancing her clients' lives and circumstances. She has coached over 1,400 clients and educated thousands with her proven coaching and training programs. And Bonnie has facilitated corporate trainings as a speaker, produced and directed live events from 25 to 50,000 attendees and on various topics. And emotional intelligence, she's an emotional intelligence speaker and trainer and specializes in leadership and branding programs. So as we go through the presentation, please type your questions in the chat area of the screen. And I think they also have some other questions they want to ask you along the way. So make sure you type those in the chat area as well. The length of this presentation will be the length of the presentation will depend on how many questions all of you have, but will be no longer than 1 hour. So thank you so much for joining us. And now, ladies, I am going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And Sheila, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So today we're going to talk about average to iconic and the 3 secrets to being a really great speaker. And as Sheila had mentioned, that our company is Naked Audience Productions. And so I'll just give you a little history of, how that got formulated, how we came up with Naked Audience Productions. And, I knew from a very young age that I was influential with my communication styles. I could get my friends to do things that they shouldn't have been doing. And I also had this ability to be able to communicate not only with my friends, but their parents to get them to do things with me. And I knew very young that there was this ability to influence and persuade. And as I kind of progressed through my adolescence, I had teachers that said, "You're a good communicator, you're a good writer," and compliment me in areas like that. And so I just thought, well, I need to grow up and be a teacher then, because that would be the arena where I would be the good educator and the good writer. And so I continued to kind of focus in that particular place at that point. And then what I discovered is that I always end up in jobs that were sales education, which always was about communication. And it was just a different formula that I used, whether I was selling or whether I was educating. And I had this opportunity to get into the event planning world, and that was really where I spent a good majority of my career time. And as Sheila had said, I put together very small events, intimate events, to very large events. And I remembered I was kind of the producer girl behind the curtain, and I would have speakers that would be ready to go on stage. And these were high-end professional speakers, and they would be backstage behind the curtain having anxiety attacks that I would have to coach them through. And I used to think to myself, what? I can't believe the money I'm paying for these speakers, and they're having an anxiety attack 2 minutes before going on stage. Or on the other side of it, it was that we had industry experts based on whatever the topic was and the program was that I was producing. And they weren't the savvy speakers that you would think. They weren't out doing this for a living. And yet they were industry experts, and they just didn't know how to get up on that stage and be able to connect with an audience. And it didn't matter whether it was a professional speaker, maybe somebody that authored a book that was a best-selling book, or whether it was an industry expert. In both cases, people had an enormous amount of nervousness and anxiety before going onto the stage. And what would happen is they'd get on the stage and they'd have this inability to connect with the audience. And it was this choppy, clunky approach to being able to address those first few minutes. And the first few minutes are critical to being able to create connection and have people buy into what your message is and trust you. So my brand is the connector. I saw an opportunity here to be able to dive into that arena. And it meant through public speaking, sales, and leadership opportunities with people to help them see where that connection takes place, how it takes place, and then support them in being able to be more authentic communicators to enhance that connection with the message they're trying to deliver. So I shared it with a friend, my big vision. This is what I want to do, and I got to figure out how to start this company. And that friend was gracious enough to introduce me to my current partner, Alejandra Crucifoli, and we ended up founding this wonderful company called Naked Audience Productions. And it's all about mastering the art of authentic communications. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Alejandra Crucifoli, and I'm co-founder of Naked Audience Productions, and as Bonnie mentioned, and Sheila, master coach and trainer. And Bonnie and I differ in our stories in that I never saw myself being a speaker or an educator, let alone really teaching these skills of being a great speaker. And I never saw this for myself because I was deathly afraid of public speaking. And so in my many years of management, I was terrified to lead company meetings because it meant that I was going to have to stand up in front of my team, my peers, my bosses, and speak. And I would like literally make myself sick before meetings. And it really stopped me from getting to that next level of my career. So when I became a life and business coach for this large coaching company, I never intended to be a speaker. I just wanted to coach people one-on-one because that was my gift, and I'm really great at it. However, it was also my safety zone. I didn't have to speak publicly anymore. I could just work one-on-one with people, helping them make a better life and business for themselves. So about 2 years into my career, I was asked to support one of the company's most popular speakers, whose support trainer actually got sick, and there was no one else to help this speaker. So they asked me, and I was terrified because I knew I was going to say yes. Having become a life coach, I had learned that how I show up in one area of my life is how I'm showing up everywhere in my life. And so if I was going to say no to this opportunity because of my fear, where else was I allowing my fear to dictate and hold me back? So I went to my first training and I decided I'm just going to charge ahead. And thank goodness that I did, because it was life-changing. And at the end of that weekend, the speaker that I had worked with asked me to learn how to become a speaker, educator, trainer for this company, because he said that I had this gift with connecting with people on a deep level that most people couldn't do or didn't quite understand how to create that one-on-one, let alone in a big class setting. And my response to him at that time was, oh, no. And not just no, I said, hell no. And he just looked at me and was like, okay, sure, we'll see. And he was right. I became that educator, speaker, and my situation really led me to seek, what is this fear all about? And how can I overcome it? Now, I didn't know that what I was going to find was not only the solutions to overcoming fear in speaking, but it's also the tools that have helped me overcome feeling unworthy or failure or like I'm not good enough, and all these beliefs that we tend to hold. So I want us to take a look at the definition of fear, and glossotopia is the fear of public speaking. And 76% of the population suffers from this fear. Even more staggering is that 93% of women who have this fear of not being good enough, that's a lot of us, feeling that we aren't good enough. And it saddened me that I was one of those women that suffered from this. So it's been a 5-year journey in seeing what this fear of public speaking is all about, where the unworthiness or those failure or doubt thoughts and beliefs really come from, and most importantly, how to overcome it. And who better to teach these skills than, someone who has overcome the fear of speaking and has applied the techniques that has literally caused this paradigm shift in my life. Because now I lead many classes in front of hundreds of people, and I'm using these 3 secrets that we're going to be sharing with you today in class. So I want to be very upfront with you because we only have an hour today. So if what you're hearing here is really speaking to you, then I invite you to listen in on how you can get more from us. Okay. So I want you to think of a time when you were afraid to speak publicly. And it could have been anything. It could have been at a board meeting. It could have been when you had to address your team. It could have been when you had to do a presentation. It could have been when you had to address perhaps an issue with, let's say, a peer or a boss. So I want you to think of that time when you had to speak publicly. And what were you afraid of? Now that you kind of have that image in your mind, what was it that you were really afraid of? And if you could take a moment here and answer in the chat section, I'd love to hear what were some of those things that you were really afraid of when it came to public speaking? Let's see what kind of responses we get here. What were you really afraid of during this time that you were afraid to speak publicly? Whether that was in the boardroom, peers, to a boss, presentation. I hear a lot of things like sounding stupid. We don't want to sound stupid. Or we don't want to look bad. Or we don't want to forget where we're at. Someone saying being a perfectionist. Absolutely. We want it to be perfect and flawless, and we're afraid that that's not going to happen. Yeah, that you couldn't perhaps articulate your message very well. That's a good one. Not having all the information. Absolutely. That you were going to say the incorrect thing. Yep. Being wrong, judgment from peers, muddling up a good message. Such great responses. Thank you, everyone. Can you see that those all are very similar to pretty much what everyone is sharing is very similar. And it's amazing that we think that we're all alone in this. But by hearing some of those responses that you're sharing, I hope that you can see you're not alone. And in fact, you're in great company. And there is a reason why they all seem or sound alike. So that brings us to our first secret. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but here it is. Be naked. Be naked. That's the first secret. Now, I understand that that's not something you hear every day, and it's a pretty bold statement. But I'm sure that you've heard people say, just picture your audience naked and then you won't feel afraid. Well, that doesn't work. When you're afraid, that literally does not work because you are in an emotional hijack. We'll explain that a little bit later here. But in this place of emotional hijack, it's really hard to breathe, let alone, conjure up this image of the audience being naked. So what Bonnie and I are introducing you through The Secret is we're saying, turn that mirror around onto yourself and you be the one that is naked. Now, not literally, of course, but you are on a stage in front of a classroom or in the boardroom, and if you're revealing all of yourself, authentically being vulnerable, then there is nothing to be afraid of because you're revealing it all. Now, this may not make a whole lot of sense because I understand that we believe we're in this, man's world. And I happen to be using words like vulnerable and reveal who you are and authentically. And these are all words that we tend to really shy away from, especially within a corporate setting dominated by men. So I'm just going to ask that you stick with me through this and you be open to this concept as I explain it a little further here. One of the main reasons there is fear with public speaking is because there's nowhere to hide. When you're on that stage, you're front and center, and there is nowhere to hide there. No matter what your stage may be, if you are the one speaking, all eyes are on you. And when this happens, our greatest fears are being put under this, microscope, and you feel like you're being seen because there is nowhere to hide. And that all of your failures have a spotlight, shining right on them. And they're being shown right there for everyone to see and for everyone to know. And we don't like to reveal those things. So in all my years of coaching and supporting others in their fears, and for myself too, it came down to these two main fears. We don't want our greatest doubts and failures to be seen or revealed, and we don't want to be judged by others. And I think we saw that through everyone's responses of what we're really afraid of. So what do you do with this? Because we don't want our failures or our doubts or inadequacies to be seen. You try and hide. You hide who you are and how you feel about yourself by putting up this front, and like pretending that you have it all together on the outside, while on the inside you're just like, oh, freaking out, really. Now, by being naked, you show yourself and you show all of your ugly truths about you. So for myself, I felt like I was stupid. That was my biggest thing, is if I'm stupid, how is anyone going to listen to what I have to say? And I didn't want anyone to know that that's how I felt about myself. So when I reveal myself now throughout any of my classes, I share the story behind why I felt stupid, and I'm revealing it right then and there, typically from the beginning of my classes. And when I do that, something called ownership happens. So when you actually be naked, reveal yourself, and share your ugly truths, then something called ownership happens. And ownership of yourself is what really creates the ability to not care what others think and gives you the control rather than the other way around. Because with the other way, the audience or the people you're speaking to are the ones that have control. So ownership by definition is staying true to one's own self despite the external pressures. Ownership, I've heard from clients and even for myself, it's hard to understand. So here's the way I want you to think about this. It's like a scar. Okay, at one point, the scar was a really painful wound. And if someone, hit it, smacked it, poked it, it would cause you pain. But over time and proper care, that wound healed and it became a scar. Now, it didn't go away to the point that you couldn't see it anymore, but the painful part of it was gone. So now if someone smacks it, pokes it, hit it, there's no pain. That's what ownership is like. Doesn't mean it's gone, but you're coming from a place of power and control, and it no longer affects you. It's like you really don't care, essentially. You're unattached, so no one can use it against you. I do understand this is a big concept to wrap yourself around, and I can certainly appreciate that because I felt the same way when I began to apply, being naked, especially to an audience. However, it truly is the most powerful tool in overcoming your fear, which is why it's our first secret. And if you could think of a time when you observed or saw someone else be naked with you, whether it was on a stage or in a meeting or just one-on-one with someone, and they were revealing themselves, they were sharing with you their hardships or their ugly truths about themselves. And once you thought about that time, I want you to think about how it made you feel that this person was really sharing all of themselves with you. They were being authentic and really not hiding behind a facade or this ego mentality. I think of Oprah. She's a great example on how naked she gets with her audience. And she wasn't always like that. Way back in the day, she would hide behind her shame of feeling the ways that she did about herself or her experiences that she'd had in life. But today, she knows that in order to overcome anything, not just fear, she needs to own herself and own her truth, even those ugly ones. Now, by the way, there's a lot of reasons why Oprah calls her network OWN, right? No one can hurt her by criticizing her anymore or judging her or trying to prove her wrong. Why? Because she's naked about all those experiences and she takes ownership of them and herself. And this is why she's one of the most powerful and influential women in the world. So now that you know why you have fear of public speaking, let's look at fear itself. And what is fear? Fear is this distressing emotion that's aroused by impending danger, evil, or pain, whether that threat is real or imagined. And I want you to take a look at the image on the screen here. And I want you to imagine that you're in the middle of a forest, all alone. There's no one for thousands of miles. And you are confronted with this huge, angry, hungry bear that's about to eat you. So I would say we would all be pretty scared at this point, right? So how would you react? Would you run to try and find a place of safety? Would you stand your ground because you know you're about to die anyhow, so you're going to go down you don't want to go down without a fight? Or would you just kind of stand there like a deer caught in headlights and then drop to the floor so you can play dead? What would you do? All those responses that I was just mentioning, running, hiding, dropping down, those are all fear responses. And there are three main fear responses. We have fight, flight or flee, and freeze. And the way you answered my question of how you would react to this big, angry, hungry bear is the same way that you react to fear when it comes to speaking. Basically, you have a bear in your audience, and you're either going to try and run from it, fight it, or freeze. Now, it's important that you know what your dominant fear response is. So I want you to take a moment here and really look at how you responded to fear when I asked you about confronting this bear. Or you can just look in your life generally. There are things that come up throughout the day that you might be afraid of. How do you typically respond to those things? And that's going to give you insight into what your main or dominant fear response is. So take a moment and think about, what is it? Do you fight? Do you tend to avoid, which would be more of a fleeing mechanism? Or do you freeze? Fear is actually stimulated by the brain, and it's entirely autonomic, meaning you don't consciously trigger it. And this is why fear is just such a hard thing to overcome, because you don't consciously have control over it. And even more so, if you're trying to control your fear, the worse it becomes. Essentially, what you resist will persist. Another reason why we are teaching you to do a what we call a 180 directional shift and stop trying to control the fear, but own it. The part of the brain that triggers fear is mainly due in part to the amygdala. And the amygdala is right here. It's part of the limbic brain. It's the site of emotional memory. It's the site of emotional learning. And here's the most important part of this. The amygdala asks one critical question of human survival, which is, am I safe? So when you are in a fear response, it's because this amygdala is being triggered because you don't feel safe. And when you don't feel safe, you will do anything to try and feel safe. So we call this whole triggering response of the amygdala a hijack. Now, a hijack occurs when an event happens that triggers an intense emotional response, like fear. And the amygdala gets activated, and it's going to start that whole fight, flight, freeze response in your whole mind-body system. So once the hijack is already happening, your body is going to respond with an increased heart rate. So your heart starts beating really fast. You're going to have increase in breathing. That's why it's really hard to take a deep breath. And you have an increase in your reflexes. At this point, you decrease or have a decrease in your working memory because you're in this default mode of protection. And that actually lasts for 18 minutes. So when Bonnie was talking about, those critical first few seconds or minutes being on the stage in a presentation, if you're in hijack, you're going to be in that for up to 18 minutes. And there's this toxicity in your body because chemicals are being released from the brain into the bloodstream. And once in the bloodstream, it actually takes 3 to 4 hours for the blood to clear. That's a long time. And you're most likely done speaking at this point. So it's going to keep lingering. If you've ever wondered why you can't get control of how nervous you are, this is it. This is why. You are in a hijack. And you are in a place that you can literally not stop it. Once that amygdala tells you that you're not safe, that hijack is going to happen. Very much like, the trigger of a gun. Once that gun trigger is pulled, there's no stopping the bullet. It's coming out. This is the same way. Now, there are ways to diminish the hijack. So when the hijack is happening, you can manage it. That would be one way. You can manage the hijack when it does happen. You can't stop it, but you can manage it. Once it's happened, I should say, you can't stop it. But the second thing that you can do to diminish a hijack is to not go into that fear response in the first place. That way you don't have to manage it once it's occurred. You can not even go there in the first place, which would be phenomenal, right? Because then you're not having to manage it. Now, Bonnie and I spend a lot of time within our workshops teaching people to stop, or the skill really, to not even get into that emotional hijack. Because we feel that that's better than teaching you how to manage it. Now, there is also a segment where we are showing you how to manage that hijack. But even better, not have it happen in the first place. Stopping the hijack before it occurs has everything to do with why our first secret is all about being naked. When you don't know who you are, or are not okay with who you are, internally or externally. And internally would be all those things on how you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself. Externally would be all those things of how you present yourself, how you physically look, dress, weight, hair, makeup, all those kinds of things. So when you're not okay with who you are internally or externally, you will always react from this fear response because you're always going to feel like you're being judged, and that amygdala will be telling you you're not safe and going into a protection mode. Simply said, when you're not being authentic to who you are and really owning that that's who you are, then it's really easy to be triggered into fear. So I want you to think about this question. Who are you? And it's a really big question. And what we typically hear when we ask this question are things like, I'm a CEO, or I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a workaholic, all these things that are roles that we actually take on, but they're not who you are. Those are just the things you do. I could say I'm a coach, but that's what I do, not who I am. There's a distinction. Knowing who you are goes much deeper than what you do. And because this is such a big question, and not one we tend to stop to think about all the time, or if you do, it's this fleeting thought and it gets replaced with more immediate pressing things that can just occupy our thoughts. It can be really helpful here to have a coach or someone support you through answering that question, because it is such a big question and it's hard to really see yourself, especially authentically. So the beauty of knowing who you are and owning who you are forms the brand that is uniquely you. You have your own brand. And knowing what your unique brand is what will give you the strength to stay true to yourself. That's that part of owning who you are, no matter what the external pressures are. And more importantly, it's how this brand is also how you market yourself in your career, in your speaking engagements, in the boardroom. So your brand is a critical part to your career. And unfortunately, we don't have time to really get into the branding part of yourself. Bonnie's going to share a little bit more with you here in your second secret. However, you do have the first steps to forming your unique brand, or I should say more so uncovering and discovering what your unique brand is. So I want to leave you with this thought. If a product doesn't have a brand, then will it sell? No, most likely not, because people won't know how to identify it. They won't know how to use it. And more importantly, they're not going to know why they need it. You are no different. If you don't know who you are and can't authentically communicate who you are because you're hiding behind a facade that's not you as a way to try and protect yourself, how can anyone really use you? How can you truly know what's in you? So this leads us to our second secret, which Bonnie is going to be sharing with you here. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Bonnie.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so if we got secret number one, which was be naked, I want to clarify in this. This is about really coming from a place of authenticity and the way that fear response works. So when you're in a fear response, you're not logic. So the brain is doing one of two things. It's saying you are in a state of survival or a state of stupidity. And when you're in one of those, you can't be in two parts of the brain at the same time. So that amygdala, when it fires, it doesn't allow you to be in a place of logic or stability. So your goal is having awareness, I'm in a fear response, and then to be able to kind of manage yourself out of it in a sense. But the sooner you have that awareness you're in it, the faster it can go away, and you can get back to a place of logic. It's natural, it's instinct, it happens. So let's talk about then number two, because it still falls into this place called connection here, and part of it being in the brain. Now, if you're standing in front of people and you're presenting in a boardroom or with your team or to clients, you know, you want to be smart, you want to be savvy, you want to be confident, and those are all the things that we want you to be. But if you're being those things by hiding some of those fears, then what you're not being is human. And it comes across that way. So people sense that energy that you're being something that is not authentic. And so the idea behind it is to be authentic. So if there's something where it's like, you know what, this is a really great topic, it's a big topic, and I'm not comfortable with all of it, but here's where I'm going to share with you where I am comfortable. So we're suggesting you just be more authentic in the communication part of it than trying to hide or look like you know it all, because people sense that that's not coming across authentic and they actually then start to judge you. Okay, so let's talk about two parts in connection here. First, when you're connecting with your audience, your team, your meeting, your board, whatever this is that you're connecting with, you want to connect with the amygdala first. So you don't want to necessarily go in with all of this logic, all of these facts and figures, all of this, features and benefits. That is a connection to the neocortex part of the brain, the part of the brain that can simulate learned knowledge and logic. The amygdala is where connection actually happens. It's actually the place where the decision to buy something comes in. It doesn't have any capacity for language. It's all based on feelings and instinct. So if you're up there and somebody's going, oh, I like her, she's kind of like me, or, oh, I've had that same experience happen, or, oh, that's exactly what's going on with me right now. That's connection happening. But if you stand up and you're coming from this place of, I'm smart, I'm degreed, I'm confident, I'm all of these things, then people actually feel disconnected from you. So you want to connect with the amygdala first. The second thing in connection is to stay connected with your personal brand. And that's a big topic. We're not going to be able to get through all of it today in this webinar here, but the opportunity to be able to understand how your personal brand is really a big part of that place that you stand in. Then there's that opportunity to keep the connection going throughout your entire presentation or meeting. So let's first talk about how to connect with the amygdala. It's your stories, it's your hardship, it's your authentic self, and it connects with others on that level. People want to know, hey, you're like me, I'm like you, and that builds trust. Trust is a feeling and it's not logical. When we say, I don't like that person, or, ooh, my gut says no, not move forward with this, it's a feeling. And we always feel before we think. We have emotion before logic. So what happens is that if you use your emotions as a real ally to you and not try and avoid those emotions, but use them as a guiding post, a barometer, a beacon in a sense, to be able to have you understand, ooh, something doesn't feel right. And you'll also be able to then have an understanding of why you're not connecting with people, because you might be coming from a place that's too logical or has expectations attached to it versus more authentic and being human. Now, logic will educate people all day long, but it doesn't create connection. Connection happens when you're coming from a place of genuineness and vulnerability, not intelligence or technique. Okay? So amygdala really gets that there's this feeling that happens where people are willing to connect with you. Now, the amygdala can provide a negative feeling, in other words, fear, anxiety, all of those type of things. But the amygdala is also a place that stores all of our emotional memories. So there's good side to the amygdala where you can trigger the amygdala positively. And the way that you do that is through the five senses: empathy, feelings, memories, and stories. So providing those opportunities where people can feel something with you. And when that feeling occurs, connection is happening. Then once you get that buy-in through that emotional connection, to the more meaty part of what you need to share with them, the learned part, the product part, the real essence of what you're trying to provide with them, the educational or informational piece comes second. It can't come first because you don't always have a connection with people. So if you look at, places of empathy, being really present with them on their struggles, them understanding that you've had struggles. Most people, most of the best presenters out there are coming from a place of, I failed at this and then I succeeded at that. And people want to know that that's part of the process of how you succeeded, that you also failed. And it's a very natural part of us being human and a natural part for us to share, but we're not comfortable sharing it. We feel really silly sharing these things because we don't want to look bad or be judged. Connection happens when you're being really honest and vulnerable with that. Now, obviously, people want to feel heard, respected, and valued. And I know that each and every one of us want to feel that same way as well. So, on the other side of feeling heard, respected, and valued, people feel shut down, let down, and put down. And those are ways that are going to disconnect you. So, you want to allow people to feel heard, respected, and valued. And then appreciation happens. And when appreciation is present with what you're saying or sharing, people are going to buy in to what it is you're talking about or where it is you're trying to take them. And then, of course, remember that memories and stories are going to create that connection as well. Remember when I have I'm one of 3 girls in my family, and so people can relate to me by some of these pieces and parts that I share throughout my presentation to create even more connection in there. Now, the second connection is connecting with your brand. And what really is your personal brand? And I'm not talking about your company brand. I'm not talking about the products that you sell brand. I'm talking about the brand that you are as a human being, your personal brand. And a lot of people develop their brands based on what they do for a living, not who they are. And remember when Alejandra said in the early part, who are you? Well, the who you are part is how you develop and uncover and discover what your brand is. And your brand is what you stand in. It's your purpose. It's what drives you. It's the part of, this is what I want to share with you today, and this is why. So it becomes the why you're propelled, why you're passionately driven about these things. Part of it is because there's something in your personal brand that drives you to keep doing what you're doing and want to have that desired success. And then once you create that connection with people, being a little bit more authentic and more vulnerable, then you have the opportunity to just stand in your brand and continue to be that foundational strength as to why this is important. And that's going to allow connection to happen too. People connect with brands, your personal brands. Okay, they're not necessarily connecting with companies or CEOs or the president or vice presidents. They're connecting with who that person is being, not necessarily what that person is talking about, but who they're being. So it's more of that body language, that tone, that feeling that we have for people, that we're willing to follow them based on that. So you weave your brand and your purpose throughout your content to keep the connection and the what's in it for them piece alive. Your brand is what I consider to be the contribution to others. So my brand is connection. That's how I provide something for other people. I support them in connection. And I can take that all the way back to being a very young child where I connected people to things and they naturally followed me and I continued to create connection. I'm one of those people that in just random places, people come up to me and ask me questions. So, either I look like somebody that might be able to help them, or I'm nice enough that they think that they can come up and ask me these bizarre questions anywhere and everywhere. But it's not always because I look like I'm the part. I could just be in a grocery store in, casual clothes or coming off of doing a workout. And people will still come up to me and ask me questions all the time. And I have to own that. That's part of the ownership of my brand, is that where I used to resist it and fight it and be like, why do people come up and ask me these silly questions? Now I just that's who I am. And somehow people feel comfortable coming up and asking me these things. So I have to own that part of my brand being connection and helping them to the best of my ability. I don't always have the answers, and rarely do I have all the answers. But I try to do my best to connect them with what their needs are in that moment. And that's the same way that I take my business, my presentations, when I'm in leadership positions and teaching leadership roles, is understanding that people really need that connection. So the buy-in is in the amygdala in your brand. The buy-in is being authentic and vulnerable in this place. And of course, in these situations, it's hard to be able to share with you all of those opportunities. But I don't want you to feel like, You have to say something like, I'm scared, because that's not what we're suggesting. Start a presentation out by saying, I'm so nervous or I'm so scared. But starting out a presentation with who you are and that vulnerable side of you, and then allowing the opportunity for that connection to take place. So we know that people don't buy from companies, they buy from people. And that connection is not with a company, it's with you. And that connection is with you, and making that emotional liaison happen, and then allowing your brand to be able to be that thing that they stand in and they can trust about you. Okay, I'm going to send it back over to you, Alejandra.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just as Bonnie was saying, you don't just show up on the stage and then throw out there at the very first thing saying, I'm scared, or I feel like I'm going to sound stupid. That leads us into the third sequence, which is sequence matters. It does matter. And I want you to think about how you run your everyday life from morning until night. What does your morning look like moving into your afternoon? And I want you to literally picture yourself getting ready for your day. What are all those steps or things that you do in order to have a successful day? You might start to notice that there is a sequence of events that must happen in order for this smooth day to happen. If you don't have those sequences, then your day can become very chaotic. Same with your work day. The same thing applies. You wouldn't walk into doing your job without having some form of sequence or structure to what you do, right? So the way you approach your speaking is the same thing. There is a structure to how you are revealing yourself and connecting. There needs to be the sequence. And Bonnie and I have witnessed this countless times with speakers in our business, and we see them in our workshops too, is that not only is there this lack of connection occurring and people putting up this front or facade because they're afraid of what the audience may think, but there's also no structure to support what they're teaching or speaking on. They just kind of travel from one subject to the next and never really knowing why they're doing it or how to take the audience along with them, because you have to bring them along with you. If you look at the entertainment industry, they actually apply a lot of what we're talking about within a very quick amount of time. They're creating connection within 30 seconds, if even that. It's even quicker sometimes because commercials may last only 30 seconds. There's connection with the amygdala, there's an authenticity about it, and there's a sequence. So there are 5 essential sequences to your speaking. Okay, there must be an opening, a relevancy, a body, a call to action, and a close. Now today we only have time to discuss the opening and the relevancy, but I'm choosing these two because they really are the most critical and the most overlooked with speakers. So starting with this opening, if you are sharing your credentials, then you're not engaging that amygdala part of you, or the amygdala part of the audience. Sorry, and I can't seem to get the slide here. It's really wanting to share your credentials doesn't engage that amygdala. You want to have that connection first, and it's critical that you share in your opening these 4 parts, because this is the sequence that's going to have you be able to speak authentically and create that connection. So the first 4 parts of your opening are your name, your role with your company, your story, and your intention for the class. Your story is where you show up. This is where you are authentic and you're sharing your brand also within your story. If you noticed when Bonnie and I did our openings with you, we followed this structure. We shared with you our stories. We didn't mention our credentials. Those were listed on the PowerPoint, which is where you can exhibit those things. But your story is where you're creating connection from the very beginning by painting a picture to your audience. And this picture is a place of pain. That's where those hardships or ugly truth shows up, to a place of pleasure. That's your success and where you are now. And when you do this, it actually creates you being the expert. That's your credibility. I was here and now I'm here, and I'm going to share with you how you can do that for yourself. Relevancy is the most simple yet the most commonly missed for speakers. Relevancy is making these topics or concepts and subjects that you're speaking on relevant to the audience. If you don't make it relevant to them, then will it create a connection with them? No, you could be authentic all day long, but you have to take them with you through irrelevancy and making it relevant to them so they continue to listen to you. So, what we see speakers struggle with is how to take this concept, product, or service that they're teaching on and deliver it so that that is relevant to the audience. And it, again, is very simple. So, think of the last conversation that you had with one of your girlfriends. I recently had lunch with a girlfriend, and we had topics from, shoes. I think we talked about Albuquerque, deodorant, and toenails. Like it was all over the place. All subjects completely not relevant to one another. Yet, during our conversation, we didn't even notice we were moving from one subject to the next because we were engaged the whole time. It just flowed from one thing to the next. That's because there was a relevancy occurring throughout the entire conversation. And it made sense. It kept us talking for hours. So that is how relevancy occurs. And it works and is powerful when someone is connected to you and making what you are teaching them relevant to them, then you're golden. They see you as one of the top speakers ever. They may not even be able to know exactly why or say what it's about, but you know why. You had sequence, you had connection, and you were owning yourself without fear. Now, I don't want to leave you without anything for the last three segments, so I'm just going to touch on those briefly. The body is where you actually are teaching. That's your meat and potatoes, you could say. There does still need to be relevancy in this, though, because you're going to be moving from one topic to the next. So you need to make sure that you keep re-engaging the audience in your body through relevancy. The call to action is where the sale occurs. Regardless of what you're selling, whether it's a product, a service, a concept, you want to paint a picture to your audience of what it would be like to not take action to you. We'll call this a place of hardship. To what it would be like if they took action with you. That's a place of pleasure. Then the audience is basically selling themselves, not you selling them. So when you call them into action, they're really selling themselves, not you selling them. Okay, and the close is where you close things up. You have your final thoughts, any questions, evaluations, contracts, whatever that may be for you. What we do suggest is that you have a closing statement so that you leave your stage feeling like there was everything was complete. There was nothing left incomplete. And with that closing statement, you also know that you're done. We've seen speakers get to a finish point and then there's the silence that they feel awkward in and then just keep going. And at that point, you've lost your sequence. You may have lost your connection at that point. So you just want to create this closing statement for you so that you know you're done at that point. You're walking off the stage at this point. Okay, so that brings us to the end or completion of From Average to Iconic, our three secrets. So let's have Bonnie and Sheila come back on here.
Okay, well, Bonnie, were you going to say something? I was going to
No.
just speak as before you got on, but so definitely attendees, ask any questions. Now is your time. I know there has been a lot of really great information that you guys have provided, and so people have just been probably just staring at you guys like I have. Give me more, give me more. But no, so great presentation. I know this is definitely one of the biggest topics that, well, for me personally, right? I'm speaking all the time, but I feel like I'm coming into my own and I love that. And of course, most of that I have to give credit to you, Alejandra, because I've worked with Alejandra for the last couple of years and she is amazing. I want to talk a little bit about your program because I think people will be really interested, and I know I am. I haven't taken that course that you're talking about to instead of managing the amygdala. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that these women would probably rather um, know how not to get into that situation.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, why would you want to manage it when you can actually not have it happen? So understandable. Yeah, a lot of that is about getting to a place of being okay with you and your story. We all have these things that happen in our life, and those things that we would call hard or things that we don't want to have to share or reveal with others because they're ugly. We don't get to express what those things are. So when there's emotions from experiences that didn't get expressed, they get stored in that amygdala. So
Hmm.
anytime there's a similar experience or a similar circumstance that's like something that happened in our past, that's when that amygdala gets fired because there's all these unexpressed emotions. So through this process that Bonnie and I teach, we're tapping into those experiences. And this may sound scary, but we're really allowing people to tap into the emotional part of it so that an expression can start to occur. Because once it's released out of you, it doesn't hold the power over you anymore. So
Hmm.
that amygdala tends to not be triggered or fired as often. For me, my whole story about feeling stupid is because my mother used to call me a stupid piece of shit. Excuse my French, everyone. When I was little, and it was this. I never got to express how that made me feel, so I carried this belief that that's who I was. So anytime I would get in front of my team or have to speak publicly, that experience was telling me, I'm stupid. I'm this piece of, what? Who's going to want to listen to me? So by getting in there and releasing those emotions and beginning to express them, that's what
Hmm.
allows me to be able to be here with you and not have that constantly being fired at me.
All right. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so we've only got a couple of more minutes. I'm wanting to specifically what you guys have a program I know coming up in New York, and then you also are doing this in other places as well, correct?
Hmm. Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that program
Yeah.
and or
So,
how they could sign up for it? Because I don't think we have
sure.
anything on the
I
slides, and we can certainly send it out in the email that we send out afterwards. There's no questions coming in, by the way, just so you know.
Okay,
But
great.
otherwise we would take them. But no, I definitely, oh, perfect. Thank you. That's great. So, and we just had a comment that said, thank you. This is a great use of an hour. I mean, I was thinking it flew by the way. So, lots of really great information. I know that everybody obviously thinks that, otherwise they would be asking you a bunch of questions. They didn't get the, oh, yeah. Can you send out the slides or a link? Yeah, absolutely. So what we'll do is you will get the recording of the session, and you will also we'll send along the link to check out more information because I think it's just of such value. You really just have to own yourself and or own who you are, and then you're feeling more comfortable. And even in the comments that came in from your question earlier, it was all about that fear and not really showing up as yourself. And there's some comments in there about well, men don't worry about this, and or I'm afraid to speak up because I just know this dude right next to me is just going to repeat exactly what I just said. And it's just so important to realize that all those articles out there over the last few years telling women that they need to be more like men is just, and I could use a word here now too, but I'll just say it's wrong. Um, so you need to make sure that you are comfortable in your own skin. And I think that's what people will really walk away with, having more of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, really being confident in your own skin and authentically confident, not this, facade where you show up on the outside like that, but internally you don't feel like that at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And men
good.
and women
Well,
are no
Bonnie,
different.
go ahead, hon. What
Yeah,
was that?
men and women are no different. We're both walking around with this big suit of armor on and this
Mhm.
facade.
Right.
We just, being women, we just come across a little bit more vulnerable and, as people say, emotional. And then we
Hmm.
try to not be emotional. And what we're suggesting is that your emotions are your allies, and you'll connect with people better when you're doing that. And listen, we have more men in our programs than we do women on a regular basis. And I don't
Wow.
know why it surprises us each and every time, but then they get that they're coming across as this, overly confident or kind of, maybe a attitude, and they
Hmm.
get that there's a way to be able to connect and be better effective in their communications, their leadership, and their presentations for the same reason that we do. So we're really not that different, but trying
Hmm.
to be one or the other is also not a good idea either.
Right. All right, ladies, it's 1 o'clock. Any couple of seconds of
Can
any
we just share
comments?
that? Yeah, so the stages program that we have two coming up, and one is going to be in California, and that's a 3-day program, so it's a little bit longer. And then in May, we have one coming up that's a 2-day program. And I know that Sheila, you're going to share more information on that with
Mhm.
our guests, and we would love to take you guys through the program and provide more of how this all kind of can be an effective opportunity for you to be a really, really powerful woman out there.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you
Been an
both
honor.
so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.